What is Project Rudy and how is it going to save college football?
You are Locked On ACC, your daily podcast on the Atlantic Coast Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Shout out to the everydayers, and thank you so much for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. He is Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack. I am Alex Dono from Locked On Canes. We will talk about changes that are coming to the transfer portal and recruiting. The NCAA is getting rid of the National Letter of Intent system and what that means going forward. We will talk about the most impactful ACC games of Week 7. It's kind of a light week. 5 teams are on bye weeks this week. But, Kenton, we have to start with the big national story. This Project Rudy proposal is basically a tweaked version, and I think a better version of the Super League reports that we were talking about a few months back. This was first reported on by Yahoo Sports, who seems to be breaking most of the news lately on big seismic stuff in college football, and it involves a 70-team, essentially Super League, but we're not going to call it a Super League. But KG, I think the big difference here is it would keep the power conferences intact rather than just like basically reinventing the entire sport as we know it.
Absolutely. It would keep the power conferences intact as well as bring regionality back. That is something that, with all due respect to Cal, Stanford, and SMU, I'm glad that y'all are here. I'm happy that you're here. So please don't take this the wrong way. Lawrence, I know you're listening. You know I love you, brother. I know, Cal, Berkeley, y'all good in my book. Y'all are always going to be good in my book. Same for Stanford, same for SMU. But there is something about those regional rivalries. And granted, our rivalries, Dono, have not been interrupted, right? NC State and the Dirty Foot Club every year, Thanksgiving is happening. It's going down. I don't like you, you don't like me. Let's meet at the 50 about it. Florida State, Miami, every year it's going to happen. I don't like you, you don't like me. Let's meet at the 50 about it. Great. But there are so many rivalries that were disrupted by this thing in a meaningful way, including some of our new partners in SMU and TCU. How did that happen? How did that get interrupted, And we look at many other rivalries throughout the country in some major colleges where it's like, where did that go? So I'm excited about that. But the biggest thing I'm excited about is this is not a traditional private equity kind of situation, right? Where it's like, hey, you're getting a group. It was a lot like what I said about, I can't remember who it was, but it was a private equity guy who was also a Florida State alum who had played football with Florida State that was going to do the injection for Florida State. And I'm like, that makes sense because he has an incentive to like, hey, I feel great pride in this thing. I need to look out and take care of it instead of gut it. I don't want to be known as the guy who gutted my alma mater's team that on the same field that I bled on, that I fought on, that I broke limbs and did all the things on. So I think it's a good thing that is slightly different. And last point, and I'll pass to you after this, Jack Swarbrick is involved. And I trust him. I trust Jack Swarbrick a lot. He has earned the equity in my book to say he cares enough about college football to where if he is involved in a meaningful way, I believe it's what's best for the game, honestly and truly.
So here's some of the details on Project Rudy. And it is a reference to Rudy Rudiger, which again, with Swarbrick being involved, it's not surprising they would go that route. Although I think if this goes anywhere, they're probably not going to be able to officially call it Project Rudy because apparently that's the name of an activewear sunglass company, which probably wouldn't be, too happy if this became an official thing, at least in terms of the name. So this is a part of Ross Dellinger's report on Yahoo Sports. Over the summer, as college administrators scrambled to unearth new cash for the onset of athlete revenue sharing, remember that's about to be a thing, a svelte, bespectacled man visited with leaders at some of the most high-profile athletic departments in the country. He presented to them his solution for the unwieldy entity of college football. It's called Project Rudy. Quote, his claim is that everybody will be saved, said one power conference director. As SEC and Big Ten leaders prepare to meet Wednesday and Thursday, today and tomorrow in Nashville for a historic summit of the industry's two powers. There is an unreported undercurrent driving the discussion, and that's Project Rudy, spearheaded, like you mentioned, Kenton, by former Disney executives turned investment professionals. Project Rudy is a Super League-esque concept, separate and more simplified than the one made public last week, that incorporates football programs of the Power Four conferences in a 70-team structure. The model preserves the four power conferences, expands the postseason, overhauls scheduling, tiers revenue distribution, and most importantly, infuses as much as $9 billion of private capital cash into the system. And, you know, a lot of the quotes about this, Kenton, were anonymous. Actually, one of the few non-anonymous quotes was actually from Miami's athletic director, Dan Radakovich, who is in favor of this. Now, obviously, based on the separation that's being created between the Big Ten and the SEC versus the Big 12 and the ACC, you'd probably figure ACC and Big 12 administrators would probably be more favorable to this because it's more of a lifeboat for them than it is to the SEC and to the Big Ten. But with that in mind, Radakovich, the Miami AD, said, of all the ideas I've seen, this one makes the most sense. Conferences are kept intact. Commissioners still have an important and valuable role, and there is the ability for schools to make increased money from bigger matchups and more playoff games. And then a part of this, Kenton, that I also would like is this would eliminate FBS versus FCS football matchups, which never really made a whole lot of sense to me. And they can be downright dangerous when you've gotten certain FCS schools going up against, you know, big time power teams. And those matchups obviously don't really move the needle with the general public anyway. So if they can get rid of that stuff, I'm fine with it.
And, you know, you're looking at a situation where each team is getting hundreds or tens of millions of dollars from this deal. This isn't a deal where guys are sitting around. I mean, if you're dividing 9 billion by 70, everybody's walking away with, and let me make sure I got these figures right here, 128 million.
Yeah.
That's an amount. That's an amount. Like, you know, everybody walks away a little bit better for this thing. And I would say the only way that this does not go through is if the two conferences that are kind of big bro and everybody right now is like, actually, I don't want to have everybody be on the same playing field. Right. We enjoy being big brother, but it's cutting off your nose to spite your face, because in the end, we are headed towards a situation where nobody's going to be able to survive this thing without some type of infusion, without some type of help, without some type of love. Because at some point in time, let's just say that, hey, how many teams is in both of those conferences? Let's say 15 each. Let's say an average of 16 or 17. So let's say those 34 or 30 teams don't join in. What if they drop $1 billion or $2 billion off of Project Rudy and still give them to the Big 12 and the ACC? Then you're behind now. You're behind, and all they had to give up was the naming rights. Well, now every game is the Disney such and so, or now every game is the Rudy Project Bowl game. You know, it's so I look at this thing and I say to myself, this is not only impactful because the ACC is objectively behind. I think this is objectively a good thing for college football in terms of, again, it's not typical private equity where you have no connection to this thing other than what is my return. You have football people, not just football people, college football people who want to see college football thrive, combined with private equity saying, hey, listen, how do we make this work? How do we make this work for everybody? Let's figure out a way. Let's get it done.
Yeah, and people need, I know that some people are kind of making fun of the quote about how this is going to save everybody. But let's remember, schools are going to have to come up with a lot of extra money once the revenue sharing becomes a thing. And so this is why something like Project Rudy, I believe, is necessary. Here's a good X post that sums it up very well on Project Rudy. It brings back regionality, like Kenton mentioned. It kills those boring FBS versus FCS games, like I mentioned, creates more big matchups in the regular season, pays out an unequal revenue share based on winning, and it keeps the Big Ten SEC from leaving the rest of the sport behind. And then that, Kenton, that last part sums up what you said, that if something like Project Rudy does not pass, maybe the biggest obstacle would be convincing the Big Ten and the SEC that, hey, even though the other conferences will get a bigger benefit from this, additional benefit than you guys get, they need to convince them that this is best for everybody.
Yeah, and I think that, when I look at this proposal, even beyond that recap of it, right? Everything that I've seen from this proposal appears to be, hey, this is a much needed shot in the arm. And even beyond what the proposal is, I'm a big believer in what's the alternative, right? Like I've seen plenty of times in life people say, oh, this thing is too expensive, or oh, how do we buy it? How do we pay for it? And I understand that if it's a luxury, right? If we're talking about a silk shirt, sure, we can talk about the price of that. Hey, you may not be able to wear the Gucci silk shirt out to the party. Whoop-de-frickin' do. But if we're talking about keeping a roof over your head, now that's a different thing. Now we're talking about if we're talking about how you're going to eat. That's a different thing where you can't say, hey, this may be too expensive. It may cost too much, or the price may be too much in terms of what we're willing to give up to get private equity. The alternative is what if you don't do that? The alternative is, okay, sure, you don't give up naming rights, you don't give up whatever it is that private equity may ask for. Sure. Then what's your answer? How do you survive?
Yeah, no, well said. Well, we'll take a look at the Atlantic Coast Conference when we come back, because there's a few games. We like to look every week at the games that are going to be the most impactful for the conference standings. I think we've got at least a couple of those this week. You want to keep it locked right here. Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack. I'm Alex Dono from Locked On Canes. We are only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On ACC. We're only getting started on FanDuel. Guys, we have been winning money this college football season. You've got some good ones on the schedule this weekend. The Clemson Tigers are 20-point favorites at Wake Forest. The Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, 5-point favorites at North Carolina. Pittsburgh, this is a good game, favored by 3 points at home against Cal. Cal trying to bounce back from the Miami game last week. There are so many good games and good spreads this weekend. You want to check it all out at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. And hey, NFL fans, you could start the season with a big return on FanDuel. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more right on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. Make sure you also check out Locked On College Football. It's an awesome channel. Our guy Kenton Gibbs hosts a show on that channel as well, the 3-Point Stance, and Spencer McLaughlin does an awesome job. Locked On College Football, available free wherever you get your podcasts, and available free on YouTube. So, Kenton, I don't know if it's just because I just watched Cal last week in the middle of the night against Miami in a thrilling football game. And of course, our guy Lawrence Ross is a great friend of the show, and I've also been captivated by the Pitt Panthers, who they're finally ranked as they deserve to be, number 22 in the country, 5-0. Cal's looking to bounce back from that Miami game. Cal's looking to win their first ACC game. I don't know. I feel like 22nd ranked Pittsburgh against unranked Cal. Is that the game you think is the most impactful to the ACC this week? Because I'm leaning that way.
Oh, absolutely. It's the game that's most impactful, but it's not the game where we stand to learn the most. That game will have the biggest ramifications on the ACC landscape going forward in terms of, is Pitt for real? Are they a serious team? What's going on there? Because in all seriousness, Pitt is still undefeated in conference. Like, let's make no bones about that. There's no exaggeration or hyperbole there. Like, that's just what it is. But with that being said, you look around the conference at the rest of the games. Clemson, Wake Forest. I mean, is it going to be impactful? Even if Wake Forest finds a way to pull off the upset, how impactful would that be to the ACC landscape at large if you believe Clemson runs the table the rest of the way? Georgia Tech, UNC, let's be for real here. Stanford, Notre Dame, not even an in-conference game. We're talking about Cal and Pitt. Louisville, Virginia. Again, even if Louisville
that's an under the radar game though, because Virginia is better than anyone realizes. They're 4-1 on the year.
And here's what I will say, and this is why that is my game that will teach us the most about the conference. Because in that game, we have the opportunity to see both of these teams in terms of who the hell are you really? Who are you when you got to get up off the mat? And also, Virginia is 2-0 in conference. You've looked up and you're saying, what? And granted, you're 2-0 against Wake Forest and Boston College, but this is Virginia, for crying out loud.
Well, and we thought Boston College was good. I think Boston College is good. I'm going to say that's a quality win.
I will leave it at quality win, but I will say this. Tony Elliott has that team rolling in the right direction. They have absolutely done what needs to be done. And this is so surprising for me because when they lost to Maryland, I said, there's the Virginia we know and love. Wake Forest is just terrible, but there's the Virginia we know and love. But that team, credit to them, they've gotten up off the mat. And credit to Tony Elliott, because you and I both said their best chance at winning this season, Calandria has to be your guy. But not only does he have to be your guy, he has to be your guy through, as Frankie Beverly and May said, joy and pain, sunshine and rain. And there was a little bit of rain, and Tony Elliott stuck with Calandria. So credit to him for that, because it was necessary not only for his confidence, but for the team's confidence and for team cohesion to say, you know what, we don't give a damn. You're going to have a bad game or two. We're going to keep rocking with you. And to his credit, he's done that. So that's why I say that's the game that we will learn the most from, because most likely I think Louisville wins this game. But if they lose that game, you and I are not really mentioning Louisville as the third best team right now. Like, neither one of us are. So I don't think that does a ton to the picture. But again, you're looking at a situation where we don't have that many ACC games this week. And of course, Syracuse and NC State, that's another game where you stand to learn a little bit, because for all of the wins that Syracuse has had, I have asked everybody, who is the good Power 4 team that they play? And nobody's given me an answer yet. Nobody's been able to give me an answer. And I get it. UNLV looked very good without their former starting quarterback.
Sluka.
I get it. I understand. Sluka gone, no Michael Allen, no problem. Sure. At the end of the day, that's still a Power 4 team. Now, that was their first time ever being ranked. So, there's that. So I look at this and I say, Dono, you're absolutely right. This Pitt game is where we have the most bang for our buck in terms of how much are we going to learn about a team this week and what means the most to the conference, right?
But going back to Louisville for a second, now, if they do lose to Virginia, that'll be 3 straight losses for them.
Yes.
And if they find a way to lose this game, and I think they'll win, but Virginia's not a pushover in my opinion, but I think Louisville will win. But if they don't win this game, I'm going to call Louisville the most underachieving team in the conference right now, because listen, man, they make a couple less mistakes. They beat Notre Dame on the road. They in some ways they outplayed Notre Dame, but Notre Dame outplayed them in the sense that they didn't make the fatal mistakes. They managed the game. Louisville didn't, right? They belonged on the same field with SMU. A lot of their problems have been self-inflicted. I would imagine if they lose to Virginia, it probably means they're making more mistakes than Virginia, because listen, Kenton, I've been watching Louisville all year. That's a good football team. Like, I think they're better than their 4-2 record would indicate. So if they lose this week, I'm going to call them the biggest underachievers in the conference. And, going back to the Cal-Pittsburgh game, you brought up, wondering if Pitt is really for real, because they've got a redshirt freshman quarterback, Eli Holstein, who's been playing out of his mind. And I wonder how Cal's going to respond, because, no matter, we disagree on that targeting call or no call, but no matter how you slice it, that was heartbreak city. Like, that was heartbreak for Cal.
You're right.
How do you respond to that? Because you can either, allow that to kind of derail your season, or you can bounce back you've got a fire lit under you. I wonder how they're going to respond from that.
You're absolutely right. Whether or not you agree on the targeting, whether or not you agree, one thing that I will always agree on with anybody is an objective truth is an objective truth. The objective truth about whether or not they called targeting, whether or not they should have called, the objective truth, it didn't get called. The objective truth, you punted the ball. The objective truth, you blew a coverage, left Xavier Restrepo wide open. The objective truth, Cam Ward threw a touchdown to win that football game. You cannot argue that. You can cry about it, scream about it, be mad about it, bemoan the ACC refs. You could denigrate them and talk about them, call them everything but a child of God. And guess what? that clock still reads all zeros,
Yeah.
and Miami still has more points than you.
Yeah, and
So,
and I've seen, and sorry to interrupt you, but I've seen the
oh,
way
you're
like
good. You're
emotional
good.
losses like that, like
Yes.
you know,
One loss turns
the
into two.
Cal linebacker Uluave, who made like every freaking tackle in the game. That dude was all over the field. Yeah, I see him on the sidelines crying at the end of the game. Like that was heartbreak for Cal. So seeing how they come back from that, you know, on 1 week they got to travel all the way across the country to Pittsburgh. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and you know, I look at this game and I say to myself, hey, the only benefit that comes into this game for Cal is the fact that both of these teams are good. And because both of these teams are good, this game ends up being played in a 3:30 time slot instead of being played in a noon time slot. Because if this game is in a noon time slot, you're coming across the country and you're playing at what is a quintessentially 9 a.m. for you. Ugh, that's tough. That's a little hairy. But you come across the country to play at what's noon instead of what's 9 a.m. That's they'll have a better shot at it. They'll have a better shot at fixing it. The biggest thing here is, like you said, we're going to find out who Cal is because we have not seen them get knocked down on the mat in this heartbreaking of a fashion already this year. That loss to Florida State, it was a weird loss. It was a bad loss, but it's like, you kind of, you know, like you don't sit there and have the argument of, well, Florida State and the refs took it from us. No, you lost that game. They were better than you on that day. So if you want to be the team that you're supposed to be, you let go of that loss and you say, hey, forget the loss. We're moving on. We're moving on. We're not going to burn the tape because we got some good stuff out of that. And we learned things we need to clean up, but we're moving the hell on. And that's all we're going to do. You know, and you can be that team, or you can be that team that lets one loss turn into two, and two turn into three, and three turn into four, and four get you a call from the AD. You don't want to be that team.
Well, speaking of moving on, the NCAA is moving on from a 60, excuse me, a 60-year rule and tradition. It's the end of an era, and here's what happens next. You guys want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet on this brand new episode of Locked On ACC. Guys, I certainly hope you've been taking advantage of the amazing deals on Game Time. Game Time is the only ticket app that Kenton and I use because not only are you getting the best prices, and those prices go down the closer you get to the event, you're also getting the best features, like the all-in pricing feature, which shows you the full price up front, no hidden fees that they get tagged on at the end. You see the total price right there up front. Get a panoramic view from your seat on the Game Time app, which is a game changer. And Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier. Game Time filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And not only sporting tickets, guys, you can get tickets to concerts, musical theater, comedy shows. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use our code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Thank you for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. For your next listen, make sure you check out our other shows. Kenton and Grayson do an awesome job on Locked On Wolfpack covering NC State. I cover Miami at Locked On Canes. And, you know, Kenton, we cover recruiting and transfer portal on our shows, and this is going to be changing. So the NCAA Division I Council, this is per ESPN, they have approved the immediate elimination of the National Letter of Intent program, which has been around since 1964. So the NLI program, National Letter of Intent, has existed as the formal binding agreement between prospective athletes and college programs for the past 60 years. Now, if you're wondering if whatever they're doing next is some revolutionary change, it's not as big of a change as you think, but it is paving the way for revenue sharing, because I think the next big thing that's going to emerge is some sort of a contract to include that revenue sharing in the future. But what's happening in the meantime is the National Letter of Intent will be replaced by a new financial aid agreement that will provide many of the same core functions as the NLI and will likely be tied to a contract related to an impending revenue sharing model across college athletics. And then part B of this, Kenton, which I think is a more dramatic change in all this. Under the new rules, transfer athletes will be allowed to sign with a new school after they've formally entered the portal. So they don't have to wait till a signing period. Once a prospect has signed a written offer of athletic aid, other schools will be prohibited from recruiting communications. So that's going to cut down on some of that tampering, right? Because we've seen last couple of years, a guy agrees to go to a team in the transfer portal. They might flip that commitment 1, 2, 3 times. Now they can sign right away.
Yeah, and I will tell you this. I'm glad that it clears the way for contracts, and I'm going to tell you something. I think that teams need to be very realistic about where they are. The players are appearing to have the power, and I don't want to say the players have too much power, but what I will say is all these players don't have good counsel in their ear. All these players do not have people telling them what's best for them in their ear. And even beyond that, there is too much opaqueness in terms of backroom agreements and deals. And we saw with a team that we talked about earlier in UNLV, did we get paid? Were the expectations met? Whatever the case may be, it's too much of that. It's too much. We saw it with Rashada. We saw it with some other situations. I want everybody, put it in writing, put it in ink, put it in plain black and white to say, hey, this is in the words of Dr. Phil, this is your man. Look at him. This is your man. And you're going to stick beside him, and that's what this should be. It should be, hey, this is the agreement, and I have a legally binding thing with you. I'm going to tell you, it took me till much too late in life to understand it's not just about a man's word and what you think and all that. This is a different ball game when you're talking about feeding your family, when you're talking about life-changing money. It's a very, very different ball game. And so with that ball game changing, we needed this change, and we needed to change our processes around what these teams look like. And last thing, and I'm going to pass it back to you. I'm honestly excited about this for the players, because I believe now you can lock in 4-year security and throw something on top of that. You can now lock that in to where, you can recruit over me. You still got to pay me what you agreed to pay me. That's just what it is. I might not get the land yop in I might not get Circle K to pay me more, or I may not be able to get Safe Light to pay me more, but you got to pay what you owe. And that's all there is to it.
That is all there is to it. And they're also going to be shortening transfer portal window from 45 days to 30 days, which I think is fine. Whatever eliminates some of the shenanigans and the tampering is good for us. Before we sign off, I want to wish prayers and blessings to everyone who's in basically the entire state of Florida, as I am. Listen, I'm not worried about my family or anything like that. We've taken the necessary measures to change our location and make sure we're safe. But if you know anybody who's in a mandatory evacuation zone and they don't want to do it, please encourage them to do so, because Milton appears to be no joke. And I'll be praying for everyone. And Kenton, don't worry about my safety and my family. We will be okay, thank God. I don't know when we're going to talk again, because I don't know what my electricity situation is going to be for the next couple of weeks. So we'll figure something out. But if you want you guys to take a good look at this face, because you may not see it for a little while.
Listen, whichever way you cut it or slice it, Dono, you're my brother from another mother, and I've got multiple friends in that area that are going to be impacted. Please stay safe to the best of your ability, right? We know that everybody doesn't have the friends, family, necessary infrastructure to go super far, whatever the case may be. Please be as safe as you can be. And I get it. Everybody wants to be safe to a certain degree, and certain others, there's the bravado of, I can ride this out. I've ridden out everyone before. I'm telling you right now, again, protect yourself. Protect yourself to the best of your ability. This ain't about what we think and about different things, or what we think about any other realm other than keep your family safe, keep yourself safe, because we want you to see Donald's face again. We want to see you again, okay? So, we'll be here, of course, bring you sports to distract you from everything else that's going on as soon as we can get Donald back, as soon as we can get everything back. But Take care of yourselves in the meantime, folks.
Yeah, and especially and if for anyone who's like out who's not in the state of Florida, obviously Locked On ACC, we got viewers, listeners all over the place. If you know people who are, just reach out to them. Just make sure they're okay. Especially people like I don't live in the Tampa area, which is going to get hit really hard, but I do have in-laws in the Fort Myers area, which could be very hit hard. Anything on the west coast of Florida, just reach out to your people there. Make sure they're good. Make sure they're evacuating, and taking all the necessary steps, because Milton is no joke. So huge shout out to Kenton Gibbs. We all love you, man. Huge shout out to you for doing a great job. Shout out to everybody tuning in. Make sure you smash that like button if you're watching us on YouTube, and subscribe to our channel. Make sure you subscribe to the audio version on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. And we'll talk to you next time on another episode of Locked On ACC, part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.